there, this is Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Carl Schmitt. Reading Carl Schmitt. Concept of the political. Okay, I'm sorry, it's having some fun with you, right? Why not have a little fun? Today we're looking at section 7 of Concept of the Political. It is the penultimate version because the 8th section is the final. So let's look at what he says in this section, okay? One could test all theories of state and political ideas according to their anthropology, and therefore classify these as to whether they are consciously or unconsciously presuppose men to be evil, by nature evil, or good, or by nature good. So therefore, the anthropology, the question of anthropology. We can judge all theories of state and political ideas based upon their anthropology, and whether they classify men consciously or unconsciously presuppose men to be by nature evil or good. The distinction is to be taken here in a rather summary fashion and not in any specifically moral or ethical sense. In other words, we're going to be just, it's not going to be, we're not going to really look at the real depth ethical aspects of it. It's going to be kind of a summary here, a summary fashion, whether they are intentionally or unintentionally. The anthropology that this theory of the state has, or the political ideas have, is whether they assume either the anthropology that in other words, the view of man, the view of human nature, is that by their nature they are either consciously or unconsciously evil or good, right? The problematic or unproblematic conception of man is decisive for the presupposition of every further political consideration. The answer to the question whether man is a dangerous being or not is a risky or not a risky or a harmless creature. In other words, this is this problem. In other words, it's either in other words, the theory is going to be problematic or unproblematic. Is there going to be a problematic, and that man is a problem? That there is going to be man is risky or dangerous, a dangerous being, or he's not? He's a harmless being. That this is going to have consequences for your understanding of political. Now, this is a Schmitt note. This is a note that he adds in this text to itself. The numerous modifications and variations of this anthropological distinction of good and evil are not reviewed here in detail. Evil may appear as corruption, weakness, cowardly, stupidity, or also as brutality, sensuality, vitality, irrationality, and so on. Goodness may appear in a corresponding variations as reasonableness, perfectibility, the capacity of being manipulated, of being taught, peaceful, and so forth. Striking in this context is the political significance of animal fables. So therefore, this is very interesting. Animal fables. The idea that this is a little thing, animal fables. This is why Aesop's fables are as much about political. The fables have the argument here is that the fables are and animal fables are kind of myth. Myth. This is something someone like Eric Vogelin will talk about. How myth are loaded with. In other words, these fables are all labels with symbols, using the idea that all these stories and things are kind of echoing, kind of a primordial. This is from the Jungian idea that Jungian and echoing someone like Joseph Campbell's also, who's following the Jungian right, that there is these myths and symbols that echo this like the human consciousness, and therefore we have these concepts of good and evil, and the animals are kind of these symbols of these anthropomorphic representations that within in our consciousness. Okay, that's Jung speak, right? That's the psychology kind of speak. But Schmitt is also saying that it's striking in this context is the political significance and fables. Almost all can be applied to real political situation. The problem of aggression in the fable of the wolf and the lamb, the question of guilt for the plague in La Fontaine's fable, a guilt which, of course, falls upon the donkey, justice between states in the fable of the animal assemblies, disarmament in Churchill's election speech of October 1928, which depicts how every animal believes that its teeth, claws, horns are only instruments for maintaining peace, the large fish which devours the small ones, etc. This curious analogy can be explained by the direct connection of, of political anthropology with what the political philosophers of the 17th century, Hobbes, Spinoza, Pufendorf, called the state of nature. So therefore, he's saying this in other words, this idea that the state of nature, the 19th, we call the 17th century political philosophers, Hobbes, Spinoza, Pufendorf, they called the state of nature, and that therefore the animals in the state of nature are the animals in this are going to behave like beings are in the state of nature in that sense. There is this metaphor, right? The connection between the anthropology and with this view of the state of nature. In it, states exist among themselves in a condition of continual danger, and their acting subjects are evil for precisely the same reasons as animals who are stirred by their drives: hunger, greediness, fear, jealousy. It is unnecessary to differ with William Dilthey. Man, according to Machiavelli, is not evil. Man, according to Machiavelli, is not by nature evil. Some places seem to indicate this, but what Machiavelli wants to express everywhere is that man, if not checked, has an irresistible inclination to slide from passions to evil. Animality, drives, passions are the kernel of human nature. Above all, love and fear. That's the Lithy talking about Machiavelli. Machiavelli is indistinguishable. Machiavelli is inexhaustible in his psychological observations of the play of passion, right? And of the play of passions. In other words, passions, and this is from this principal feature of human nature, he derives the fundamental laws of all political life, right? 25 here. This is that little thing. This is talking about the collected works of Machiavelli, right? Machiavelli, talks about this. This is, I think, read the Prince of Times, who you can see this in the chapter the Machmensch in Lebensform. Edward Spranger says, for the politician, the science of man is naturally of prime interest. It appears to me, however, that Spranger takes too technical a view of this interest, as interest in the tactical manipulations of instinct drives. So therefore, the Power Man, right? This is the Lebensform book, right? And the power, the Machtmensch, Power Mensch, the Power Man, right? This idea. This is very technical in that sense. He's saying the tactical manipulation of instinct drives. In the further elaboration in this chapter, which is crammed full of ideas and observations, there can be recognized time and again the specifically political phenomena and the essential existentiality of the political. So therefore, the political phenomena and the entirely existential question of to be or not to be, right? That's existential. This would mean to be or not to be, being or not, being or death, being survival, not survival, right? This is the existential aspect. For example, the sentence, the dignity of power appears to grow with its sphere of influence, right? Quote, relates to a phenomena which is rooted in the sphere of the political and can therefore be understood only politically. In other words, this idea of power appears to grow with its sphere of influence. So as the influence grows, the power grows, right? But this is only makes sense in the terms of the sphere of the political, he says, and therefore understood politically. It is, to be sure, applicable to the following thesis. The weight of the political is determined by the intensity of alignments, according to which the decisive associations and dissociations adjust themselves. Let's look at this for a second. Ready? This is highlighted this for this reason. It is, to be sure, applicability of the following thesis, right? This question. The weight of the political is determined by the intensity of the alignments, the alignments of the friend and enemy, the relations of social entities, right? According to their decisive associations and how their associations and disassociations adjust themselves. How are they relating to this? Is this a friend or an enemy? As Hegel's presupposition concerning the dialectical change of quality into quantity into quality, is comprehensive in the context of political thought only. In other words, this is that weird note on see note on Hegel in 62, 63. This is that whole note on Hegel, right? Go see that note he'll talk about in 62. 60, oh, I don't have my copy of it for this right now. Now, why is this important? Because this is that whole idea of this dialectical change from the question of quantity to quality. This is the master slave dialectic, right? The quantity question is the one, the few, the many, right? And the question is a freedom, right? That none are free, one are free, few are free, more are free, most are free, all are free. This is the master slave dialectic in human history. I think this is referring to here, and I'm not. Okay, Hegel is going to be a little later, so let's go to. So Helmut Plesser, who as the first modern philosopher in his book Mach und menschliche Natur. I think this is 37 junkers like this. Okay, I understand. And let's just look at this like this. That's cheap. Let me give you a cheating thing here. Detect language, German. Right. Let's do this. If I remember correctly. So everyone sees it right here. Power and human nature. Right. That's right. Mach and human nature. In his book on power and human nature, dared to advance a political anthropology of a grand style, correctly says that there exists no philosophy and no anthropology which is not politically relevant. Just as there is no philosophically irrelevant politics. So this is interesting. In other words, all the question of no philosophy and no anthropology. You can have no philosophy and no philosophy. It's not going to have relevance for politics. And likewise, there is no philosophy irrelevant to politics. He has recognized in particular that philosophy and anthropology, as specifically applied to the totality of knowledge, cannot, like any specialized discipline, be neutralized against irrational life decisions. Man, for Plesser, is primarily a being capable of creating distance, who in his essence, his nature, his character, what he is, the essence, what he is, the thing that he is undetermined, unfathomable, and remains an open question. So this is a weird thing that man is what? Even though he has a nature, he still has this, what? He's undetermined. He's able to choose, able to make things. Therefore, this is why it cannot be merely neutralized and against irrational decisions. The irrational plays a part. It's not simply just this logical thing. The irrational plays a part here. Now, this is where I maybe say that, listen, that even the irrational follows patterns, okay? There's going to be patterns, and that you can know the patterns, and therefore that even the irrational, what is the irrational, still operates in a system of this is the kind of scientist I'm a little bit of the scientist. There's going to be a distribution pattern. Certain distributions of things are going to have patterns. So even irrational choices will have certain variation in patterns. So therefore, what we can do is, even though therefore from the patterns of what something that will likely occur versus less likely occur. So therefore, I think I think Schmitt is right here in that sense that there is the irrationality in this sense. There is that human beings are driven as much by things other than mere utility. The economists just use utility, but there's also honor and things like that. Honor, pride, things that are valued. In other words, our values are vary on things, and because our what we value can vary from the utility. But even then, that is a utility, right? Isn't if honor can you can understand honor in light of the logic of utility. In other words, honor itself, it may be the irrational thing still follows a pattern in the sense. So let's stick on this point here, right? That he says that, in other words, but again, this whole point is that there's anytime you're going to have politics, there's going to be implied any politics is going to have in it assumed anthropological and also assumed philosophical meanings. So therefore, philosophic meanings and anthropological things are going to have very much political impact as well. And therefore, if one bears in mind the anthropological distinction of good and evil and combines Plesser's remaining open with his positive reference to danger, Plessinger's theory Plessinger's theory is closer to evil than to goodness. In other words, he's open to danger. In other words, and therefore, Plessinger is seeing that man is kind of dangerous and maybe evil. This thesis coincides with the fact that Hegel and Nietzsche, too, also belong on the side of evil. And finally, power itself. According to Burckhardt, well-known and by no means ambiguous expression, is also something evil. So Burckhardt, the famous Swiss culture philosopher, friend of Nietzsche, about culture, civilization, and that's that, right? I have pointed out several times, now this is 28, what is 28 doing in political anthropology, right? That the antagonism between so-called authoritarian and anarchist theories can be traced to these formulas, this idea of good and bad. In fact, this is right. That, in other words, authoritarian and anarchists, the anarchist thinks man is good, and the authoritarian tends to look at man as evil, right? A part of the theories and postulates that presume man to be a good liberal, a part of the theories and postulates which presumes man to be a good liberal, without being actually anarchist, are polemically directed against the intervention in the state. So therefore, this is interesting. The liberal views. This is you see this among libertarians. You see this with libertarians and liberals. The idea is that, oh my God, we just have private action. Okay, you see this in a lot of the what I call neoliberal thinking, but also Jason Bremen. This idea is that actors can, maybe he's even kind of arguing against it. He's classically arguing against political action because it's irrational. But at the same time, and his argument against democracy as being it's done by the stupid. No, his epistemological critique of democracy, which is very much fitting with Plato in that sense, right? Um, People like Bremen and those crowd. The liberals really think that people doesn't need political reality. That people are able to achieve their goods by cooperation. This is the kind of This is the idea that this leads us to game theory concepts. And that difference between someone who believes that actors competing with each other, all the game is always zero sum. One must win, one must lose. If you have a zero sum game where there's only going to be winners and losers, and there's going to be one winner, or maybe and there's competition, and that there's going to be like that, then you're going to have a view that man is there's not going to be win-win situations. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. Now, if you believe that it's not a zero-sum game and that there can be win-win outcomes, then you get a liberal view. And the idea of the question here is, what is the purpose of the state? And that the idea here in the liberal view is that man's good this is interesting because if you look at the early like Hobbes is a liberal. The liberal takes, in other words, the ironic situation in Hobbes and Locke is that it is to escape the to escape the state of nature and the war of all against all, that we create society. in order to secure rights, right? That is the liberal view. Hobbes is a liberal, and the father of liberalism. Whereas Rousseau is not an anti-liberal who believes, oh, man is by nature and is only accidentally. So man accidentally creates society, and society, because of its accidental nature, corrupts man, and therefore we need to, this idea is, again, he's the idea is socially good, but then he doesn't come up as a liberal. He's an anti-liberal in terms of certain ways, right? So therefore, this is why this is a much more complicated problem in that sense. Um, but anarchist ideas often postulate this idea here. So liberalism is what? Even though they're not actually anarchists, they are polemically directed against the inventions of the state. And you can see this a little bit in someone like Thomas Paine, right? There's the anarchist streak, and this is why the people like Paine and the British liberals, some of the British radical liberals of the 18th century and the starting of the 19th century, produced the radicalism in that sense, right? Because they view that private people are good, and that they are going to be able to achieve private goods without the necessary of the state. The state is only there because individuals are bad, and that if we can just prevent the, okay, that's the weirdness of it, right? This is without the actually anarchists and their polemical directed against the invention of the state. Inge- uh, uh, um, Ingenuous anarchism reveals that the belief in the natural goodness of man is closely tied to the radical denial of state and government. So therefore, this is right. In other words, there is the anarchistic situation the belief of goodness of man is that we don't need the state, that we only need this, that the ingenuous ingenuous anarchism reveals that the belief in the natural goodness of man is closely tied to the radical denial of the state and government. One follows from the other, and both foment each other. In other words, this is a very important point that he makes. In other words, that the natural goodness of man leads to the denial of the state. Okay, and that the natural denial of state leads to the natural goodness of man. In other words, these reinforce each other, right? For the liberals, on the other hand, the goodness of man signifies nothing more than the argument with those aids the state is made to serve society. In other words, the goodness of man signifies nothing more than an argument with those with whose aid the state is made to serve society. Right? So liberal says that this means that society determines its own orders, and that the state and government are subordinate and must be distrustingly controlled and bound to a precise limit. So therefore, this is the idea that the liberal thinks, okay, the state serves the good man, the good of man, and but it must serve society. It serves society. It must serve this, and therefore must be limited, constrained, and distrustingly controlled and bound by too precise limits. The classical formulation by Thomas Paine says society is a result of our reasonable, regulated needs. Government is the result of our weakness. This is right. This is why Paine, I think Schmitt gets on. This is where Schmitt is on the nose. Paine is very much the radical liberal in that sense. He moves the liberal doctrines of Locke and Hobbes now to a more radical position, and therefore this idea here. Something goes on here. Um, See Die Dictator, the formulation by Baton and the Tribune people, any institution which does not presuppose the people to be good and the officials corruptible is reprehensible, is not liberal, but meant in the sense of a democratic, meant in the sense of the democratic identity of the ruler and ruled. So therefore, this is a very good that moves Tribune of the people, right? Any institution that does not presuppose the good of the people and that officials are corruptible is not liberal, but meant in the sense of the democratic identity of the rulers, right? So therefore, this is very interesting thing here. The radicalism vis-a-vis the government grows in proportion to the radical belief in the goodness of man's nature. Bourgeois liberalism was never radical in a political sense. This is just point, a very good point. Bourgeois liberalism was never radical in the political sense. Yet it remains self-evident that liberalism's negation of state and the political, its neutralization, its depolitizations, and its declarations of freedom have likewise a certain political meaning, and in a constant situation, these are polemical, directed against a specific state and its political power. So, therefore, this idea, even though bourgeoisie liberalism is, in other words, the ascension that, in other words, it is necessary that liberalism's negation of the state and the thing, that by the triumphing of things like the economic over the political, the ethics over the, in other words, triumphing these other phenomena over the political by trying law, making law, Trump having law trump the political, having legalism, law and legalism, administration. In other words, these neutralizations and depolitizations, and the so-called Declaration of Freedom, autonomy from coercion and things like that, they have a political meaning. And the concrete situation of these polemics are directed at a specific state and power. But it is neither a political theory, in other words, but this is neither a political theory nor a political idea. So liberalism's critique or attack, in that sense, against specific states and their power is not a political theory, he seems to argue in that sense. That this is not a theory, this is like, but this is neither a political theory nor a political idea. Although liberalism has not radically denied the state, it has, on the other hand, neither advanced a positive theory of the state, nor on its own discovered how to reform the state, but has attempted only to tie the political to the ethical and to subjugate it to economics. So this is the critique, and actually this is the left-wing critique. This is the what I call the contentional left-wing. This is like what we see among the post-60s, 70s left. The idea is the argument of this postmodern left, or post-liberal left, post-communist left. This idea that that liberalism ties the political to economics, subordinates political things to economic things, right? That economic, and that's Marx too. Remember, Marx is the same thing. So this is kind of a critique of Marx's idea that economics is the real thing of things. That this is the subordination of political to the subordination of politics to economics is the fundamental liberal mistake in this sense, the bourgeois mistake, and that therefore this is why it's problematic in this fundamental sense. That therefore this it has attempted only to tie the political and the ethical to the ethical and subjugate it to economics. It has produced a doctrine of the separation and balance of powers, i.e., a system of checks and balances and states' control and government. Again, this is the idea. Liberalism is this idea. This is Montesquieu. This is why Montesquieu does this. Montesquieu triumphs as the balance of separation of powers. This is Federalist Papers number 10 and 51, right? This is the Federalist Paper, both in chapter 9, 10, 11, but also famous 51, I think, if I remember correctly. In other words, it has produced this doctrine of separation, of this doctrine of the separation and balance of powers. Separation of powers and balance of power, a system of checks and balances of state and government. This cannot be characterized as either a theory of the state or a basic political principle, as Schmitt argues. Now, this is where I would say, Schmitt, no, you're going too far. You're going a little too far here. It's division of labor. In other words, it is not politics at the highest sense, but it is the how politics organizes and operates itself in terms of action in the world, that you have to divide power. Why? Because this is the division of labor. That you can't, the tools, the instruments of things, how power, how it will manifest, how rule, how we want to call this in Greek arche, German Herren, right? Rule of people. Um, polit- Now, there's different types of rule, as I've dealt in other essays about this. This is something Weber even highlights. But political rule is both kind of a combination of coercion and persuasion for a collective benefit, right? For the collective benefit of the community. That was like the community must benefit, and it'll be coercion and persuasion is mutually done here, and that the idea here is that ideally there should be less coercion and more persuasion, but if needs must, there needs to be some coercion. If there's too much coercion, this becomes problematic, but this is still political in a sense. And that's the distinction here. And I think this is there is an argument that that what Schmitt goes too far in this critique. Now, I think he's criticizing here is that the marginalization in other words, the fetishization of things like separation of powers and division of labor, separation of powers as a fetish when different regimes may not require it, and that therefore, in fact, it might be counter that an independent judiciary could be that has extensive authority may actually be a threat to democratic structures and things like this. And I think Schmitt is right in his book on parliamentarism is very good about how extra, these mechanisms of separation and parliamentary structures can actually frustrate and undermine democratic legitimacy and democratic democracy in the thing. So this cannot be characterized either as a theory of state or a basic political principles. Idea of separation of power. They're not, and I think he's right on this point that it is not that this is not a theory of state. This is about the behavior of state. This is about the structure of state. This is. I think this is the functioning of the government. That's how you divide the labor to work effectively or not effectively, and also the question of to the degree of despotism in the state in that sense, because the power over if it's too power. In other words, this is where I think there's a thing about this that we have to understand. Power cannot be this is where I would say to Mr. Schmitt, hey, don't you understand? Look, you need to listen to Pareto, Vincent Pareto, about the question of any kind of power itself cannot be unlimited good. Why? Because power, like any good or anything, there's going to be at a certain stage, more of it can actually produce less and have negative consequences. In other words, power itself may have a Pareto point of limit to it. Not because there's like anything, all human actions and all human goods have limits to them. Not in other words, we can fetishize that. Everything must be limited, and therefore ultimately castrate power to make it weak, and that is dangerous. Yes, I think Schmitt. See, the problem with this, I think Schmitt is reacting to the tendency of neo-Kantian legal thought and neo-Kantian. Remember, Schmitt is a lawyer primarily, and Schmitt is reacting to the way neo-Kantian and English pluralist doctrines overly use law as a way to marginalize and curtail the political, okay, and try to make everything norm, use law for everything when maybe there shouldn't be a law, okay. The idea of the exception. Go back to the exception, right? The exception versus the norm. What he talked about earlier in this book, that the exception is the crisis. That laws and the normal procedures cannot. The laws and the normal things of functioning. See, the normating function of government is done through laws. That's right. Okay, normal things, there's laws and procedures and these rules. But then there's going to become crisis. The idea that you can legislate the crises and to put crises under the constraint of law. This proves that law, that politics is to be subordinated always to the rational, to the legal, and to the administrative. And the depoliticization is neutralization, the terms that he likes to use. Now, what remains is the remarkable and for many certain disquieting diagnosis that all generally political theories presuppose man to be evil, i.e., by no means an unproblematic, but a in other words, i.e., by no means an unproblematic, but a dangerous and dynamic being. In other words, he's by no means unproblematic, but a dangerous and dynamic being. This can be easily documented in the works of every specific political thinker. Insofar as they reveal themselves as such, they all agree on the idea of a problematic human nature, no matter how distinct they are in rank and um, in prominence in history. It is suffice to here to cite Machiavelli, Hobbes, Bousset, Fichte, as soon as he forgets his humanitarian idealism. That's the later Fichte, not the early Fichte. De Maistre, Duns Scotus, Pétion, and Hegel, who, to be sure, at times also show his double face. In other words, the idea of the goodness of man, too. Schmitt note. This is the Hegel note they talked about. Hegel, nevertheless, remains everywhere political in the decisive sense. Those of his writings which concern the actual problems of a time, particularly the highly gifted work of his youth. Okay, this is the Constitution of Germany, right? This is the German Constitution of Germany. Are enduring documentations of philosophic truth that all spirit is present spirit. In other words, all spirit is present. All spirit is present spirit. This remains visible also through the correctness or incorrectness of Hegel's empirical. If okay, this is one of those. I know this. If empirical, you know, I'm having. I've been over here too long. I'm using inferior, inferior. I mean, this is one of his positions on historical events of his time. So therefore, the ephemeral. Sorry, I see a PHF. Ephemeral. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, this is what happens. Ephemeral position on the historic events of his time. The historical spirit does not reside in the Baroque representations or even in romantic abyss. That is Hegel's Hic Rhodus, um, uh, 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 and the generalness of a philosophy which does not permit the fabrication of intellectual traps under the pretext of apolitical purity and pure non-politics. So that is that of a specifically political of a specifically political nature also is his dialectic of concrete thinking. This is in other words, his so-called dialectic of the master-slave dialectic, right? In the phenomenology of the mind, right? This is is found even there. The often quoted sentence of the quality transforming a quality a quantity transforming into a quality has thoroughly political meaning. It is an expression of the recognition that from every domain, the point of the political is reached, and with it a qualitative new intensity of human groupings. Right. That the number, the one, few, many, all, and freedom and lack of freedom. Right. This dialectic of the master say of dialectic in that sense. That every domain, the point of the political is reached with a qualitative new intensity of human groupings. The actual application of this sentence refers to the economic domains and becomes virulent in the 19th. So Marx is taking this in terms of economics, of economic class, right? This is taking the Marxist conception and understanding the one, few, many in terms of class, and it changes this is the 19th century, right? The process of such a transformation executes itself continuously in an autonomous, so-called politically neutral economic domain. The other two, non-political or pure matter of the fact, now turns political. Okay, in other words, what is turned, the irony here, what is turned as a development of economics is Marx's thing of political economics, of pure economics, turns into a political position. When it reaches a certain quality, economic property, for example, becomes obviously social and more correctly political power. Proprietaire turns into pouvoir, property turns into power. And what is at first only an economically motivated class antagonism turns into a class struggle of hostile groups. So again, Hegel also offers the first polemically political definition of the bourgeois. The bourgeois is an individual who does not want to leave the apolitical or riskless private sphere. So the bourgeois does not want to leave the apolitical riskless private sphere. He rests in the possessions of his private property and under the justification of his possessive individualism. This is where C.B. Macpherson probably gets, this is right from C.B. Macpherson, right? Justification, which is a critique of Locke and the Lockean position, right? Of the bourgeois. In other words, he rests in possession of private property under the justification of his possessive individualism. He acts as an individual against the totality. He is a man who finds his compensation for his political nullity in the fruits of freedom and enrichment, and above all, the total security of its use. Consequently, he wants to be spared bravery and exempted from the dangers of violent death. Right? This is the famous. This is okay. This is remember. This is sorry. Yeah, the scientific treatment of natural law by Semons Gurk. Right. The translator divides Hegel's distinct phases, which Smith quotes. The critical reader may contrive a better translation. Right. This is. In other words, Hegel has also advanced the definition of the enemy, which in general has been evaded by modern philosophers. The enemy is a negated otherness. So this is the otherness, the other. This is the dialectic, right? The positive and the opposite, and then it's negates, and then dialectic, right? The enemy is the negated otherness, but this negation is mutual, and this mutuality of negation has its own concrete existence as a relation between enemies. This relation of two nothingnesses on both sides bears the danger of war. This war is not a war of families against families, but between peoples, and hatred becomes therefore undifferentiated and freed from all particular personality. This is from Hegel, right? The question is how long the spirit of Hegel has actually resided in Berlin. The question is how long the spirit of Hegel has actually resided in Berlin, right? This idea. In any event, the new political tendency, which dominates Prussia after 1840, preferred to avail itself of a conservative philosophy state, especially one furnished by Friedrich de Stael, whereas Hegel wandered to Moscow via Karl Marx and Lenin. In other words, Stahl's understanding of this was Prussia, 1840. Stahl's understanding of this Hegelian but Hegel's himself wandered by Marx's by. In other words, Hegel. The Stahl is this conservative theory of the state, which it's a different theory of state than this total state of dialectic. Now he says it wanders to Marx via. His dialectical method became established there and found its concrete expression in the new concrete enemy concept, namely that of the international class enemy, and transform itself the dialectical method, as well as everything else, legality, illegality, the state, and even the compromise with the enemy, into the weapon of this battle. The actuality of Hegel is very much alive in Gregor Lukács, right? This is Lukács's famous book, um, 31. This is, if I remember correctly, this is, uh, um, yeah, History and Class Consciousness. This is available in translation at MIT, very good book. History and Class Consciousness. Um, uh, he cites the expression by Lenin, which Hegel would have made with reference to the political entity of warring people instead of classes. Persons, say Lenin, who think of politics as small tricks, which at times border on deceit, must be decisively refuted. Classes cannot be deceived. So, in other words, this is not tricks. Politics is not tricks. Politics is the conflict of class and their interest in states at their interest. For Hegel, it's peoples and states. For Lenin, it's classes, right? The question is not settled by the psychological comments on optimism and pessimism. It follows accordingly to the anarchist method. In other words, the question is not settled by psychological comments on optimism or pessimism. This is not about optimism. In other words, this whole issue about the good nature or bad nature is not a question of pessimism or optimism. It follows accordingly to the anarchist method that only individuals who consider man to be evil are evil. So that in other words, even the anarchists say, "Oh, those considered are the evil." Those who consider him to be good, namely the anarchists, are then entitled to some sort of superiority or control over the evil ones. The problem thus begins anew. So therefore, the anarchist idea is that the anarchist idea that this assumes that no, these guys, these who view the people as evil are really the problem, and therefore we who understand people are good are the right ones, and we should have power over them. This is the new friend and enemy thing he talks about, right? Schmitt points there. The problem begins anew. One must pay more attention to how very different the anthropological presuppositions are in the various domains of human thought. So again, we have to pay in other words, how very different anthropological presuppositions are in the various domains of human thought. With methodological necessity, an educator will consider man capable of being educated. In other words, the educator will view man as capable. Because the educator is saying that, because it would be what if men cannot be educated, then the educator is useless, right? So it's methodological necessity that makes an assumption of certain things. A jurist of private law starts with the sentence, the one who is presumed to be good, right? This is, again, 32. This is the liberal Bruncelli. Again, this is famous. Remember, um, all the Claremont Institute conspiracy theories. Oh, that this is the administrative state. See, Bucelli, this is the German Hegel, uh, 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 the introduction of administrative state into our system. No bullshit. Locke and Hobbes is the monster. Bucelli in this crowd is nothing but Hobbes and Locke. Geez, this is what's so funny about the Claremont position here. It's how uneducated it is. The very nature of, if you read Stadler writings of Bucelli, of these are liberals. These are nice, good Lockean, Hobbian liberals who just understand that this is okay. We have to depoliticize. This is the whole point of it, right? So this is Bucelli in his Le de Modern State. Again, this is right straightforward. This is the honor from the modern state. Honor. It's uh, I think it's the state of the modern state. No, the study of the politics, political science. Right. This is, I think, political science. I think, yeah, politics as science. It's politics. It's part three. Um, uh, 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 the Lera. Is it honor? I don't think it is honor. I think this is teaching. Okay, teach. Okay, teach. Uh, 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 the teaching of the modern state, or the thought of the modern state, um, and the science of politics. Right. He asserts against Stahl's doctrine of parties that jurisprudence, which initially has nothing to do with the doctrine of parties, not does not start with the evilness of man, but the golden rule of jurists, whoever is presumed to be good. Whereas Stahl, in accordance with his theology, puts at the top of his thought the sinfulness of man. Jurisprudence for Brunelleschi is naturally civil law. See note 1. The golden rule of juris derives its meaning from the regulation of the burden of proof. Moreover, it presupposes that a state exists which has created the external conditions of morality by producing a normal situation within each man can be good. So therefore, the idea that the state creates it, creates state's conditions, the laws, the rules, which mean this is the Hobbesian position, right? It's that man can be good is because that the state has been created and the laws exist. This is again, Bocelli is a nice Hobbesian. Hegel's a nice Hobbesian. Jeez. This is what I really laugh about that. Okay, aren't you being mean to your fellow paleo, your right winger, alt righter, take attack on neoliberals and neocons? Sorry, they're just wrong on this. This is why Gottfried is. I kind of, even though I think Gottfried gets a lot of things wrong about the Strauss and the importance of Straussian things and ideas, Gottfried on this is right on the terms of what the Stott law tradition is and what these ideas are. And the Claremonters are simply just ignorant of German in that sense, what the German tradition is and what it meant. Oh, and overstate Hegel. Hegel is again just Hegel's. I mean, the idea of the administrative state coming because of Hegel is exaggerated in a fundamental sense. It's administrative state comes from as administrative law is something that administrative law rises with civil law, Roman law models of legal structures. Yes, this happened. But again, this has always been the case of Roman law legal systems. The real aspects of the bureaucracy being autonomous, this is an English concept. This is what Weber clearly highlights in his history of bureaucracy. You see that little bit of the clerics in the Middle Ages, the Chinese religious class in that sense, clerics in there, even there. But then in Britain, it's not clerics; it is these ministers who become the ministers of the crown. And it becomes. And what is Hegel's philosophy of right? But imitating Britain in that sense. He's a liberal in that sense. He's trying to give Germany, the Prussia, a kind of constitutional frame that they see in England, right? This is why someone like Stahl rejects this in that sense. Okay, right? This is why this idea of things up here is the way it goes. So let's continue this, right? This idea that men are evil, those who consider them to be good, namely the anarchist, the superiority, right? The problem thus begins anew. One must pay more attention to how every different the anthropological presumption of various domains of human thought. With, in other words, this idea of educated, the jurist does this, that. The theologian ceases to be a theologian when he no longer considers man to be sinful or in needful of redemption, and no longer distinguishes between the chosen and the unchosen. The moralist presupposes a freedom of choice between good and evil. Again, this is 33. To the extent that theology becomes moral theology, this freedom of choice aspect prevails, and the weakness of the doctrine of radical evil weakens the doctrine of radical evilness. Men are free and endowed with the opportunity to choose between good and evil. Therefore, it cannot be true that some men are by nature and are good by nature, and other men evil. This is Carius contra heresies, right? This is because the sphere of political life is the final analysis determined by the real possibilities of entity. Political conception and ideas cannot very well start with a anti-political optimism. In other words, this is because hostility, right? Political conceptions and ideas cannot very well start with optimism. This would dissolve the possibility of enmity and thereby every specific political consequence. So this is the point. Schmitt makes the point that you need enmity, conflict, hostility, conflict. That this is the foundation of the political in that sense, because of the existence that this is a threat. This is this idea of threat. And as I said elsewhere, this over to what extent does friendship matter? You know, this friend. Schmitt oversizes. He stresses enmity and ignores philia. And this is maybe the limit of Schmitt in that sense, the overstressing of enmity at the expense of, and therefore this is why the double-sided aspect of, because I think this is the reason he's doing this is because the conception of philia, the goodness of man, right, tends to lead to economics, the over privileging of the economic and moral, and this led to consequences. This has led to the consequences of depoliticization that he's reacting against. So therefore, there's a reaction here. The and hence this would dissolve the possibility of enmity and therefore every specific political consequence. Right, the connection of political theories with theological dogmas of sin, which appear prominent in Bousset, Mastra, Boulogne, Don Cortes, Frederick de Stael, and others, is explained by the relationship of these necessary presuppositions. The fundamental theological dogma of the evilness of the world and the human and man leads, as does the distinction of friend and enemy, to a categorization of men and makes impossible the undifferentiated optimism of the universal conception of man. So therefore, this is the idea that, in other words, once you have the evilness of man, then it's going to be very difficult. This requires friends and enemies, and therefore it's going to be hard. It's going to make it very difficult to have the optimism, the undifferentiated of the universal conception of man, right? In a good world among good people, only peace, security, and harmony prevails. This idea of universal conception of man, right? Priests and theologians are here just as superfluous as politicians and statesmen. In other words, only in a good world, this peace, good people, peace, security, prevail. So priests and theologians are just as superfluous as political statesmen. What the denial of original sin means socially from the viewpoint of the individual psychology has been shown by Ernst Troelix in his, I think this is the, I think this is Troelix's classic book on this, is the social teachings of the Christian churches and groups, right? And Sulla, in his publications about romanticism and romantics and the numerous sects, heretics, romantics, and anarchists, right? This is Sheila. This is the two, Tolek and Sheila. Actually, I would recommend reading this two-volume book, the social teaching of the social teaching of the Christian church and groups. It's a very good, outstanding book in that sense. The methodological connection of the theological and the political presuppositions are clear. That the methodological, but theological interference generally confuses political concepts because it shifts the distinctions usually into moral theologies. Therefore, this is the danger with theology. It moves it to moral theology, even though they're connected. This idea of the theological difference generally confuses political concepts because it shifts it to moral theology. This is why this is sometimes this moral goodness and this political thinkers such as Machiavelli, Hobbes, and often Fichte presupposes their pessimism only the reality or possibility of the distinction of friend and enemy. For Hobbes, truly a powerful and systemic political thinker, the pessimistic conception of man is the necessary presupposition of a specific system of political thought. He also recognized correctly that the conviction of each side that it possesses the truth, the good, and the just brings about the worst enemies. Finally, the war of all against all. This fact is not the product of a frightful and distinguishing fantasy, nor a philosophy based on free competition of bourgeois society in its first stage. Tonnes' position, right? But is the fundamental presupposition of a political philosophy. So, in many sense, he's kind of making fun of Tonnes, Frederick Tonnes's Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, about the idea here of this, and that he says that this fact is not a product of a frightful and disquieting fantasy, nor a philosophy based on free competition by bourgeois society in its first stages. Okay, this is Gesellschaft, right? This is Gesellschafts and of this, but the fundamental presuppositions of a specific political philosophy. And here I think maybe Schmitt is being unfair. I think there is this truth to what Thomas is saying about societas or Gesellschaft in that sense, a society in that sense versus community, and that this is the modern idea. And the modern idea is that, hate to say it, Hobbes's social entity is the idea of the social contract, which is an economic activity of compact, and that creates the structure. So that is a bourgeois society. In other words, this idea of the bourgeois society to escape conflict and harm. So this is why Strauss's critique of Schmitt is pretty right. That he thinks, in other words, he turns Schmitt turns to Hobbes, thinking, "Oh, this is great." But Hobbes is the father of liberalism, so he never escapes the liberalism that he's trying to escape from. Right? Um, okay, let's continue. These political thinkers are always aware of the concrete possibility of the enemy. Their realism can frighten men. Can frighten men in the need of security. Their realism can frighten men in the need of security. Without wanting to decide the question of the nature of man, one can say, in general, that as long as men are well off or willing to put up with things, he prefers the illusion of an undisturbed calm and does not endure. He does not endure pessimists. So, in other words, okay, this is a very interesting point. Schmitt says, when people are well off, when everyone is comfortable and well off, they don't deal with the pessimists. They want to keep their goodies. They want to put it when well off. They're willing to put up with things. He prefers the illusion of the undisturbed calm, and does not assume the political adversaries of a clear political theory will therefore easily refute political phenomena and truths in the name of some autonomous discipline or more as amoral, uneconomical, unscientific, and above all, declare this, and this is politically relevant, a devilry worthy of being combated. So this is the point. He's making fun of this point. He says the adversaries of a clear political theory will say, "Oh no, that political phenomena is in truth anonymous. Discipline as a moral or economic or scientific. And by the way, this is devilry. This must be fought against. Okay, political." Schmitt note: this misfortune occurred to Machiavelli, who, had he been Machiavellian, would have sooner had written an edifying book than his ill-imputed prince. In actuality, Machiavelli was on the defensive, as was also his country, Italy, which in the 16th century had been invaded by the Germans, Frenchmen, Spaniards, and Turks. At the beginning of the 19th century, the situation of the ideological defensive was repeated in Germany during the revolutionary and Napoleonic invasions of the French. When it became important for the German people to defend themselves against the expanding enemy armed with a humanitarian ideology, Machiavellian was rehabilitated by Fichte and Hegel. This is a very interesting point, right? The worst confusion arises when concepts such as justice and freedom are used to legitimate one's own political ambitions and to disqualify or demoralize the enemy. The worst confusions is when justice and freedom is used to legitimize your ambitions and demoralize the enemy. It is the shadow of an embracing political decision, and in the security of a stable political state organization, law, whether private or public, has its own relatively independent domain. So in other words, only in the shadow of an embracing political decision, and in the security of a stable state organization, does law have its relative domain. As with every domain of human endeavor and thought, it can be utilized to support or to refute other domains. Okay? So every domain of human endeavor and thought can be utilized to support or refute other domains. But it is necessary to pay attention to the political meanings of such utilizations of law and morality, and above all of the world rule and above all, of the word rule or sovereignty of law. The rule of law, and so you have to be careful about this, man. That you have to pay attention to the political meaning of such utilizations of law and morality, especially all the rule of law or the sovereignty of law. Because that's a trick. In other words, the rule anyone speaks to the rule of law or the sovereignty of law is privileging law above politics, and therefore there's something going on there. First, law can signify here the existing positive laws and law-giving method, which should continue to be valid. In this case, the rule of law means nothing else than a system, than the legitimization of a specific status quo, the preservation which interests particularly those whose political power or economic advantage would stabilize itself in this law. So the first thing of the rule of law means, like one sense, it means what? The systems of rules and regulations that legitimizes the status quo, right? The second, appealing to the law can signify that a higher or better law, a so-called natural law or law of reason, is set against the law of the status quo. In this case, it is clear to a politician that the rule or sovereignty of this type of law signifies the rule and sovereignty of men or groups who can appeal to this higher law and therefore decide its content and how and by whom it should be applied. Hobbes has drawn these simple consequences of political thought without confusion and more clearly than anyone else. He has emphasized time and again that the sovereignty of law means only the sovereignty of men who draws up and administers the law. The rule of higher order, according to Hobbes, is an empty phrase if it does not does not signify politically that certain men of this higher order rule over men of a lower order. The independence and completeness of political, the independence and completeness of political thought is here irrefutable. In other words, the independence and completeness, there's a comma here that shouldn't be there, thought is irrefutable. There always are concrete human groupings which fight other concrete human groupings in the name of justice, humanity, order, or peace. So, in other words, the idea is that there's going to be groupings. They're going to fight other groupings. And using the argument is for what? Name of humanity, justice, humanity, order, peace. When being reproached for immorality and cynicism, the spectator of political phenomena can always recognize in such a reproach a political weapon used in actual combat. In other words, oh yeah, you're just political. You're doing it political. You're partisan. That is a this is what is it? It's trying to. This is a political weapon is being used in combat against you. When being reproached for immorality or cynicism, this is really a what? When I comment on the political phenomena, this is a weapon to use against me, and what is being done here as a political weapon to determining that you should shut up or you should obey in the new world. Okay, political thought and political instinct proves themselves theoretically and practically in the ability to distinguish friend and enemy. The high points of politics are simultaneously the moments in which the enemy is, in the concrete clarity, recognized as the enemy. So, in other words, the high point of politics are those moments where the enemy is, in concrete clarity, is recognized as the enemy. Another Schmitt note. With regard to modern times, there are many powerful outbursts of such enemy, right? There is by no means harmless. Okay, this is a French. I think this is French. Hold on. No. Okay, the crush of the information of the 18th century, the fanatical hatred of Napoleon felt by the German barons Stein and Kleist. Exterminate them, the French. The Last Judgment will not ask you for your reasons. Lenin's annihilation sentence against the bourgeois and Western capitalism. All these are surpassed by Cromwell's enemy towards the towards papist Spain. He says in that speech of September 17, 1658, "The first thing, therefore, I shall speak is to that in the first lesson of nature, being and preservation. The conservation of that, namely of our national being, is first to be viewed with respect to those who seek to undo it, and so make it not to be. Let us consider our enemies, the enemies to the very being of these nations." He always repeats this very being or national being, and then proceeds, "Why, truly, your great enemy is the Spaniard. He is a natural enemy. Is naturally so. He is naturally so. He is naturally so throughout. By reason of that enmity, he is in the enmity that is in him against whatever is of God. Whatsoever is of God, which is in you, or which may be in you." He repeats, the Spanish is your enemy, and his enmity is put into him by God. He is the natural enemy, the providential enemy. And he who considers him to be an accidental enemy is not well acquainted with Scripture or the things of God. Who says, "I will put enmity between your seed and her seed." Genesis, book 3, 15, passage. That with France one can make peace, not with Spain, because it is a papist state, and the Pope maintains peace only as long as he wishes. Again, this is Cromwell's letters, right? And again, I need to put some in my stomach because my stomach's producing acid. And last paragraph of section 7, long one, huh? But also vice versa, everywhere in political history, in foreign as well as in domestic politics. The incapacity or the unwillingness to make this distinction is a symptom of the political end. The political end. In other words, the politics at its end. The death politics, right? In Russia, before the revolution, the doomed classes romanticized the Russian peasant as good, brave, and Christian Musik. The relativistic bourgeois in the confused European searched all his sort of exotic cultures for the purpose of making them an object of his aesthetic consumption. The aristocratic society in France before the revolution of 1789 sentimentalized man who is by nature good and the virtue of the masses. Tocqueville recounts the situation in his book on the ancient regime and revolution. Right? His words are stuttering tension. In words whose stuttering tensions arise in him from the specific political pathos. Nobody scented the revolution. It was incredible to see the security and unsuspiciousness with which these privileges spoke of the goodness, mildness, and innocence of people. When in 1793 it was already upon them, the the spectacle, the ridiculous spectacle of the terror. This is like this is yeah, the ridiculous and terrible spectacle, the terror, right? There's of this, right? This is how they spoke of such things even while this is happening. This is that wonderful line in Tocqueville in that sense. So let's stop here. We're stopping at the 8. This is a long one. Anyone else comments or questions, please put them below, and I will respond to them when I see them. If you liked it, like it, share it, pass it out. Send notes to people. Tell people about the Schmitt stuff or even my other stuff. Please, let's grow the channel. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. If you encourage others to subscribe, let's grow the channel, please. Oh, yay! Please, let's do this. Now, if you didn't like it, you can thumb down. Go ahead, thumb down if you didn't like it. And say why, though. You just have the courage to say why you didn't like it, what I did wrong, or something. So you can criticize me technically. The sound is wrong, though. The fan is in the background. Or why are you doing la 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 la? Or don't give me some reasons, and we can learn from it. That's the whole purpose of this. Now, you want to follow me on social media? You can follow me below. If you want to help me out doing these things and continue these projects, you can do so by subscribe to our Patreon. Okay, no, everyone's doing it. I understand why people aren't doing it. Because you aren't doing anything for us. You're not having special hosts or things like. I will do that if you ask me to. People ask me and do it if there's things there. I'll be a good boy. Um, um, I will sing for myself. But people say you're giving this away anyway, so why are you doing this? This is the problem, right? This is I'm giving it away anyway, so why should we pay? Oh, then be generous, help. This is be useful in that sense. Or another thing you can do is if you've not bought my books already, or you've seen this, you want to help, buy my books. This is below. Well, that's it. Again, these are posted usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Schmitt stuff. Next time is going to be the end one. I don't know what I'm going to be in a problem. I People tell me I should do my. People say I should do the Kojev, but I'm kind of like Kojev is a tough one. I might do it, might not. Um, I might do it. I don't know what I would do. I might try something else. I'm not going to do another Schmitt. Because Schmidt's other books are kind of a little too big, and I'm trying to finish my Montesquieu. I'm trying to Montesquieu is even killing me now because the chapters there are huge and they just gobble up what time I have in that sense. So therefore, that's it. Montesquieu's on Mondays and Wednesdays, and Fridays. We'll see. We'll hope this Friday we'll be doing it. I was a bad boy. There was a problem one day because of something happened and the internet was down and I couldn't do it, and I was like very upset. So we'll see what we can do. I hope that I can have that problem today. Okay, that's it. Have a good day. Take care and bye bye. See you later.